19-year-old British soldier Gilbert King thought he had seen everything. He survived the mud of Normandy. He watched friends die under relentless artillery fire. He considered himself hardened. Everything changed on April 15, 1945. King walked through the gates of Bergen-Belsen. The world he knew collapsed in an instant. How does a civilized state turn death into a conveyor belt? The answer stood directly before the British in a pressed SS uniform. A figure crawled toward King through the filth. It was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman. The skeletal shape reached out and kissed his boots. King froze. The air itself was a weapon. A thick, physical wall of stench hit the soldiers miles before they reached the gates. It was the smell of industrial-scale decay. Inside, the numbers defied human logic. 13,000 unburied corpses rotted in open pits under the April sun. Nearby, 60,000 survivors stood like ghosts. They were skeletal, infested with typhus, and barely breathing. 13,000 dead and 60,000 living specters in one place. It was the population of an entire European city, left to liquefy in the dirt. Combat veterans who had fought across the continent stood at the edge of the pits and wept. In the center of this nightmare stood one man, Josef Kramer. The contrast was a physical blow. The prisoners were hollow shells. Kramer was well fed. Their clothes were rags. His SS uniform was clean and sharp. He didn't run. He didn't hide. Kramer stood calmly, waiting for the British to arrive. Forget the image of a born monster. To understand the Butcher of Belsen, look at a failed electrician living with his mother. How does a common man become a cog in a killing machine? 8 years of total poverty and social isolation. Before the camps, Josef Kramer was invisible. Born November 10, 1906 in Munich, a strict Roman Catholic home, middle class. His father, Theodore, worked as a government accountant. His mother, Maria, ensured he never missed Mass. The scene in Augsburg was always the same. White tablecloths, Sunday dinners, the quiet clinking of silver. Then, the silence changed. The post-war economy collapsed. Theodore lost his job. The plates stayed empty. 2 grown, able-bodied men sat in a cramped room for years, staring at the walls. At 14, Josef tried an apprenticeship as an electrician. He failed. He tried a department store. He tried accounting. Nothing stuck. From 1925 to 1933, Kramer was a ghost in his own country. By 1932, German unemployment surged past 6 million people. The Kramer family was a single drop in a national ocean of despair. The Great Depression didn't just take their money, it took their dignity. Germany was a pressure cooker of rage. National humiliation from the Great War turned into a desperate hunger for a target. The Nazi Party fed that hunger. They offered a uniform to replace the rags of the Great Depression. In December 1931, Josef Kramer walked into a local office and joined the Nazi Party. 8 years of biting poverty ended with a signature. In December 1931, Josef Kramer filled out a Nazi Party membership card. He was 25 years old. 6 months later, he joined the SS. It was a state-sponsored hiring spree. For Kramer, the black tunic wasn't about racial purity, it was about a paycheck. The transition was physical. He traded the rags of the Great Depression for high-quality wool. The fabric was stiff. It creaked with every movement. After years of being a ghost in Munich, he finally had weight. He finally had a salary. The motive was simple. His widow confirmed it years later during the post-war trials. Kramer didn't join for the ideology. He joined because he was out of options. The SS bought his loyalty with a uniform and a chain of command. The bureaucracy of terror began to move him like a chess piece. In 1934, he started as a guard at Dachau. The promotion ladder was made of barbed wire. From Dachau to Sachsenhausen, then Mauthausen. Each transfer was a career move. Each new camp was a step up the administrative ranks. He wasn't a fanatic. He was a professional climber in a system that rewarded cruelty. By the time the gates of Auschwitz opened, the transformation was complete. The careerist had found his peak in 1940. The careerist who climbed the bureaucratic ladder from Dachau to Auschwitz finally reached his dead end. He didn't flee. He didn't hide in the ruins. Josef Kramer waited for the end among the mountains of corpses he created. The British called him the Beast of Belsen. Can an entire state ideology be judged through a single executioner? The British military tribunal proved it was possible. They weren't just prosecuting a man. They were dismantling the administrative machine of the Weimar collapse. Kramer stood in the dock, a perfect cog from a broken system. He claimed he was only following orders. The court disagreed. The trial stripped away the uniform, exposing the ordinary failure underneath. This was geopolitical retribution in its purest form. The British legal machine began to grind the perfect soldier of the Third Reich into dust. 45 defendants sat beside him. The world watched. The evidence was undeniable. Imagine a frozen December morning in 1945. The air is sharp. The gallows are ready. Albert Pierpoint, Britain's most precise executioner, arrives at Hamelin Prison. He spent his career perfecting the long drop to ensure a near-instant death. Kramer climbed the steps without a word. He had survived the Great Depression and thrived in the SS, but his luck ran out in a courtyard in Lower Saxony. Pierpoint adjusted the noose. The trapdoor snapped open at exactly 9:34 a.m. In May 1944, Josef Kramer returned to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The deadliest machine of the 20th century was about to hit its limit. The logistics of death faced a crisis. How does a state machine process a surplus of corpses? Kramer found the answer in open pits. In just 2 months, the Nazi administration deported over 430,000 Hungarian Jews. It was the fastest rate of slaughter in human history. The industrial crematoria could not keep up. The gears of the state stalled under the weight of the dead. Kramer stepped onto the selection platform. He stood among the steam and the screams of the arriving cattle cars. He pointed left for labor. He pointed right for the gas. Sometimes the bureaucracy required a personal touch. Kramer watched an inmate. He drew his Luger. He fired. The bullet tore through the prisoner's hand. Beyond the walls, the infrastructure of the Holocaust shifted to manual labor. Prisoners dug massive trenches. Kramer ordered the bodies burned in the open air because the ovens were full. Black, oily smoke rose from the pits. It blotted out the sun. The stench of burning flesh carried for miles across the Polish countryside. Inside the camp, Kramer maintained his version of order. He forced female prisoners into punitive drills. Marching, sprinting, squat jumps. They moved until they collapsed face down in the mud. Anita Lasker, a cellist in the camp orchestra, watched from the sidelines. She survived because the system needed a soundtrack for the terror. Years later, a survivor held up a scarred hand in a British courtroom and identified the commandant as the man who pulled the trigger. Kramer mastered the logistics of death under the direct mentorship of Rudolf Höss. By 1940, he was no longer a witness to the machine. He was its essential component. But the technology of turning humans into inventory was truly perfected in 1941 at Natzweiler. The camp functioned as a state-contracted laboratory. This was not chaotic violence. It was a precise bureaucratic order from the highest levels of the Reich. Heinrich Himmler personally authorized the project. The goal: create a permanent racial exhibition for the Reich University of Strasbourg. 57 men, 29 women, 86 people in total were selected as raw material for a pseudo-scientific collection. Kramer stood at the peephole of the gas chamber. He watched the occupants die. He held a stopwatch. He noted the exact time of the final breath. This was a government contract fulfilled to the second. Investigators later found the evidence in the basement of the university. Beheaded bodies floated in metal tanks. The skin was pale, preserved forever in clear formalin. They were destined to become skeletons on display. The commandant never denied the act. He cited the chain of command and the direct orders of the Reichsfuhrer. To Kramer, the screams behind the steel door were merely the sounds of a manufacturing process. He stated plainly that he did not consider the liquidation of these 86 people a crime. It has been more than 80 years, yet that single statement remains the definitive proof of a system where murder was a legal requirement. While the furnaces of Auschwitz-Birkenau consumed thousands, Josef Kramer was busy with paperwork. He was not just a killer. He was a career bureaucrat, building a life within the gears of the state. The Nazi system did not see a conflict between mass murder and a stable home life. It encouraged it. Can an architect of genocide be a devoted father? The Third Reich's bureaucracy proved that the answer was a simple yes. The social mechanics of the SS functioned like any other government branch. Career advancement, bonuses, and family benefits were standard. 21-year-old Irma Gries, known as the hyena of Auschwitz, moved through this system with terrifying ease. She stood at the selection ramps in steel-reinforced boots. The air was filled with a sharp, rhythmic crack. Gries frequently flicked her signature leather whip, which she kept meticulously wrapped in cellophane to preserve the grip. She smiled while pointing prisoners toward the gas chambers. Behind the wire of Birkenau, she and Kramer reportedly began an affair. It was a professional partnership between the camp's commandant and its most sadistic female guard. The contrast was absolute. To the world, they were monsters. To the Reich, they were efficient employees. Kramer had a wife and children. He did not hide his work from them. Instead, he treated his transfer to Bergen-Belsen as a standard corporate relocation. Kramer filed formal, typed requests to his superiors. He asked for permission to move his family into a residence near the camp. He filled out the necessary forms for furniture, heating, and rations. While overseeing the systematic starvation of thousands, Kramer spent his afternoons finalizing the lease for his own children's new home. Domestic peace ended on the 1st of December, 1944. Josef Kramer arrived at Bergen-Belsen. This was no longer a transit camp. It was a destination for the dying. How many days does it take to kill thousands without a single gas chamber? In a collapsing empire, the answer is measured in hours. The camp lacked crematoria. Under Kramer, they were redundant. The geography was a cruel joke. Bergen-Belsen sat 400 meters from a river. Only 4 city blocks separated the thirsty from the water. Thousands died of dehydration. Kramer later told the tribunal he lacked pumping equipment. It was a lie. British troops arrived and found the machinery sitting idle inside the wire. They had water flowing to the survivors within hours. The prisoners had been drinking from concrete tanks. The British found them filled with human filth. Logic failed. Logistics died. One transport arrived with 1,900 people. Over 500 were already corpses, sealed inside cattle cars. Those who survived the journey were too weak to walk to the gates. Inside the barracks, there was no space to lie down. Prisoners slept sitting upright, bone against bone. During the peak of a brutal German winter, the entire camp had only 200 blankets. The cold was a physical weight. During mandatory morning roll calls, Kramer forced the sick onto the frozen ground. They stood for hours in sub-zero temperatures. Kramer's explanation was simple. He told the court the prisoners were lazy. They needed fresh air. By March 1945, the death rate climbed. 250 to 300 people died every single day. The SS turned the famine into a sport. Guards practiced sharpshooting near the kitchens, targeting starving men. Multiple witnesses placed Kramer among the shooters. Even the staff felt the collapse. Guard Herta Ellert confronted Kramer about the mounting piles of bodies. He didn't blink. He told her to let them die. The court sentenced Herta Ellert to 15 years. Kramer met the British with a chilling demand. He wanted to keep his weapons. In the middle of a graveyard, the commandant expected professional courtesy. They arrested him on the spot. By September 17, 1945, the scene shifted to a courtroom in Lüneburg. How does international law judge a system that made industrial murder the norm? The Lüneburg trial began 2 months before Nuremberg. It was the first real test of whether civilization could prosecute the architects of genocide. 45 SS defendants filled the dock. Josef Kramer sat at the top of the list. He pleaded not guilty. He denied the selections. He denied the gas chambers. He denied everything. Then Anita Lasker took the stand. She was calm. She was precise. She was devastating. Lasker looked at the tribunal and described Kramer on the Auschwitz platform. She saw him there with her own eyes. Contrast defines the defense. When the prosecution named Irma Gries, Kramer didn't flinch. He told the court he could only speak the best of her. He claimed she took her duties seriously. Then the court read Gries's own confession. She admitted to the deliberate and regular use of a whip on prisoners. Kramer dismissed it. He told the judges she was simply exaggerating. The man who ran Bergen-Belsen sat in a suit, defending a woman who whipped humans for pleasure. The prosecution moved for the kill. They asked the question that echoed through the hall. Did he prefer to be a party to wholesale murder rather than be arrested himself? The failed electrician from Augsburg. The unemployed youth who joined the SS for a paycheck. The father who wanted his children to live near the mounds of corpses. Kramer looked straight at the tribunal. The heavy silence of the room broke under a single word. Yes. Kramer's confidence at the tribunal mirrored the same systemic madness he displayed when British forces arrived on April 15, 1945. Before the collapse, the camp followed a familiar pattern of erasure. Guards burned records. They shed SS uniforms for civilian rags and vanished into the German countryside. Kramer stayed. He began a cynical transformation. Suddenly, the Beast of Belsen scrambled to find food for the dying. He attempted to improve conditions in the final weeks. He acted as if a brief performance of decency could rewrite a decade of industrial slaughter. The British 11th Armored Division expected a standard prisoner of war camp. Instead, they hit a disaster zone. 60,000 survivors moved like ghosts between the barracks. 13,000 unburied corpses lay in piles across the frozen ground. Kramer did not hide. He waited at the main gate. He personally escorted British officers through the carnage. He walked past mass graves as if conducting a routine inspection. The air was thick with the stench of decay, yet Kramer remained composed. Then came the surreal demand. He formally requested that his armed SS guards remain at their posts to maintain order. Surrounded by a mountain of dead, the commandant asked to keep his weapons. The British refused. They arrested him on the spot. The British Army arrested the commandant, but they inherited a biological time bomb. Tens of thousands of infected prisoners remained. Typhus threatened to break the gates and sweep across post-war Europe. What do you do with a territory that has become a viral landmine? The scale of the neglect was systemic. The camp sat a mere 400 meters from a river, yet thousands died of thirst. Kramer provided only 200 blankets for tens of thousands of freezing people. Outside, 13,000 unburied bodies lay in the mud. The British 11th Armored Division realized the structures themselves were the enemy. They deployed army flamethrowers. The heat was absolute. Wooden barracks, infested with lice and disease, turned into pillars of black smoke. One by one, the buildings collapsed into ash. The military reduced every wall and every floorboard to nothing. They erased the physical Bergen-Belsen from the map of Germany. But the fire had limits. It could consume wood, but not memory. The testimony of Anita Lasker remained. The story of the skeletal survivor kissing a liberator's boots remained. The physical evidence turned to smoke, but the facts did not burn. While British bulldozers leveled the smoking ruins of Bergen-Belsen, international justice prepared its final protocol for December 13, 1945. The smoke from the infected barracks had barely cleared, but the facts remained. The tribunal at the Belsen trial reached its verdict. Josef Kramer stood before the judges. No hesitation, no regret. The court found him guilty of war crimes at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. The sentence was death by hanging. The British government demanded clinical precision to answer Nazi chaos. They flew in Albert Pierpoint. Britain's most prolific executioner arrived at Hamlin Prison on the morning of the executions. He brought a scale of drops and a professional coldness. His task was to replace sadism with the mechanical gravity of the law. The procedure followed a rigid, rhythmic order. First, the women, including Irma Grease. Then, the men in pairs. 11 executions in total. The gallows worked from early morning until late afternoon. Pierpoint ensured each death was near instantaneous. It was a factory of justice. Josef Kramer walked to the trapdoor. This was the man who once watched through a peephole as 86 people died from gas. The man who oversaw the deaths of 300 prisoners every single day at Bergen-Belsen. He was 39 years old.